Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Hills from Separation Science and I'd like to welcome you all to our latest webinar in collaboration with Agilent. Our topic today is Getting Better GCMS Results for Maximising Productivity in High Throughput Labs. Let me introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Our first presenter is Angie Smith-Henry, an applications chemist for GC and MS supplies at Agilent in Wilmington, Delaware, USA. Previously, she was an applications chemist for the MSD Solutions and Applications Group with a focus on developing analyzers and applications for energy, chemical and environmental markets. Angie holds a PhD in physical chemistry from Lehigh University and a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Juniata College. Following Angie is Gustavo Serrano, GC Columns Product Manager at Agilent. Gustavo has a broad background in GC technologies, including experience as an R&D scientist and product manager at Sigma-Aldrich Sapelco, where he worked on the development and commercialization of novel GC stationary phases. He has also published extensively in the fields of portable micro GC systems, GC columns, and microthermal modulators for GC by GC applications. Gustavo holds a PhD in Environmental Health Sciences from the University of Michigan and an MBA from the University of Indiana at Bloomington. And so, without further ado, I'll turn the presentation over to Angie Smith-Henry. Angie?
Thank you. My colleague Gustavo and I are going to discuss ways to maximize productivity with your GCMS system. To maximize productivity, we are going to discuss potential ways to increase throughput using select liners and smaller inner diameter columns, choosing the best columns for your analysis with a focus on mass spec and ultra-inert columns, and further minimizing GCMS system downtime with backflush and jet clean. When you do install those new columns for faster analysis, we'll also talk about using self-tightening nuts for fast, easy, and leak-free column installations, and finally, using smart GCs and consumables to help track consumable lifetime and avoid unnecessary downtime. Let's start with our first topic of trying to maximize throughput by decreasing maintenance frequency with fritted liners. Glass wool is easily dislodged with abrupt changes in inlet pressure, or it can migrate into the flow path, which can cause issues with peak responses and compound breakdown. Also, glass wool fibers can be more difficult to deactivate since there can be millions of little fibers in your liner. Inconsistent deactivation can also cause peak and compound loss due to active sites. Alternatively, there are sintered glass fritted liners that have been produced to avoid the issues observed with dislodged wool fibers or active sites. The glass frit is sintered into place, so there's no movement in the liner. The frit also has consistent pore size, which can lead to a more consistent deactivation. Also, a sintered frit prevents non-volatile matrix from getting to the head of the column compared to glass wool. The low frit liner is a splitless liner and gives excellent response in peak shape, especially for tricky analytes like your nitrophenols. The mid-frit liner can be used in split or splitless mode and is meant for general purpose analyses. On our next slide, we will discuss a comparison of the splitless frit liner to splitless wool liners. We tested the splitless fritted liner and similar splitless glass wool liners with the wool at the bottom by the taper in environmental analyses, specifically EPA 8270, focusing on soil extracts as the matrix. We used a dirty soil extract as a tough test on these low frit and low wool liners. We observed similar DDT breakdown initially, indicating good deactivation for all liners, as shown in the table on the top right of the slide. When running the soil extracts to test for lifetime, we recorded approximately double the lifetime for the fritted liner over the splitless wool liners when averaged over 5 liners per type. A longer lifetime for your liner means more revenue generating samples can be run before requiring downtime for inlet maintenance. An important part of liner testing is verifying that peak response returns when a new liner is installed. Here we show 2 example compounds for checking peak recovery with replacement of a fritted liner. These compounds are sensitive to active sites and do not always recover back to their normal peak height and area in the EPA 827D analysis. The black trace is the first run on the first liner. The red trace is after 20 matrix injections on that first liner, where both compounds have fallen outside of the calibration ranges. A new liner was then installed, and the green trace shows a recovery of peak height and area, which brings both compounds back into the calibration range, so we're no longer failing the 8270 calibration criteria. Both 2,4-dinitrophenol and hexachlorocyclopenadiene recover and pass that 8270 calibration criteria when a new fritted liner is installed during inlet maintenance. Furthermore, this process can be repeated with multiple rounds of inlet maintenance and liner replacement, as shown here with hexachlorocyclopenadiene. We did that with liner 2. We were able to replace it and regain our intensity, and then ran that for 20 matrix injections, did our inlet maintenance, installed a new liner, and we increased that response back to the original height and peak area. Based on internal and customer testing, the splitless fritted liner works best in splitless or pulse splitless injections when your analysis requires an inert flow path and you would benefit from longer liner lifetime, such as in dirty environmental matrices for semi-volatile organic compound detection, like EPA 8270, which we discussed, or for pesticide residue analysis in food or cannabis. For the middle frit liner, it is a good general use liner for split or splitless injections, such as white powders analysis or drinking water analysis.
All right, thank you, Angie. Now it's time to talk about GC columns, one of my favorite topics for sure. I can tell you that in the last decade, there has been so much improvement in GC column technology that the right column for your application will give you all the tools you need to optimize your analysis. I'm talking about improved reproducibility and column lifetime, better signal-to-noise ratio, and faster analysis time without sacrificing resolution. It's like with cars. There is a TV ad that's something like, oh, the new car is not your grandpa's car. I'm not sure if you've seen that before, but it relates to columns. So the new MS grade ultra-linear GC columns from Agilent are not your grandpa's column. But yes, let's see how the right GC column maximizes productivity for your GCMS analysis. So, below you will find 3 key aspects that will help you choose the right column. The first one is column dimension. I will show you in the next slide how, with a little bit of GC theory, you can explain the relationship between column dimension and column efficiency. The best efficiency you can get out of your system will allow you to optimize your analysis time, which easily translates into more samples per day and less operational cost. The other 2 important considerations are based on column technology, and I'm talking about inertness and bleed. At Agilent, we spent many years of R&D to develop the best-in-class column activations that allows us to offer GC columns with the best inertness and lowest bleed levels in the market. And we achieve this without sacrificing column lifetime. So good inertness and bleed results in 2 key aspects that contribute to improved productivity, more reproducible data by means of lower RSD values, and less column changes. So you spend more time running analysis and less time changing columns or conditioning columns. So, some theory on GC columns. Perhaps you know about this, but a way to measure GC column efficiency is through N, the number of theoretical plates per column. I want to highlight theoretical because there are really no plates inside the columns. The concept of plate is based on all distillation columns where plates were used to fractionate compounds by boiling points. The other relationship I want to make is between N and H, which is plate height. The smaller the H value, the efficiency of the column goes higher. You can probably relate H to the space between these theoretical plates. The smaller the space between plates, the more plates you can get to accommodate more plates per length. And that takes me to the Golay equation. We're not going to discuss this equation in detail. That's a lot of work and bring me some of my nightmares of my PhD life. But I just want to point out the R value. This is radius of the GC column. It is proportional to the H value. So the lower the radius of the GC column, the smaller the H value. So the Golay equation is telling us that the narrow ID columns, like 0.18, are much more efficient than 0.25 ID columns and 0.32 ID columns. So here we see the Golay curve, or also called Van Dimter curve when it's applied for GC. And we apply the Golay equation. We run some numbers through modeling, and as you can see, under similar conditions, the narrow ID column, 0.18, gives you the lowest minimum plate height. And as expected, the 0.53 gives you the poorest efficiency. If you prefer to look at numbers, on the right, you can see plates per meter for different IDs. You may also notice a red line, and perhaps you may be wondering, well, if 0.18 is great, it seems like 0.05 millimeters ID will be even better. Theoretically, this may be true. You will get excellent efficiency values with narrower ID columns. However, there are other parameters to consider that will make your analysis on a 0.05 ID very, very challenging. Capacity, for instance, is one of them. You will have very, very limited capacity and a lot of column overloading. Also, you may not generate sufficient inlet pressure to get a constant linear velocity through the column. So the red line is just a be careful line. With current GC technology, 0.18 millimeters ID is the way to go if you're looking to optimize the efficiency and faster analysis time without really sacrificing in resolution. Once you decide to try one of these options to increase your productivity and efficiency of your GC analysis, you have to also figure out how to translate your method parameters. And if you are as particular as I am when optimizing a method, you take so much time to get it right the first time that the thought of changing it makes you break out a cold sweat. The easy-to-use GC Method Translator tool is here to help. The program is free to download from the Agilent website. See the link below, or you can Google Agilent Method Translator calculator and you will get the link faster. Once you download the calculator, all you have to do is input your current parameters into the column on the left and make the adjustments you would like on the column on the right. For instance, just change your gas from the drop-down at the top and see how your parameters changes. Give it a try. See what changes you can make to your analysis runtime by just changing something as simple as switching to a column with a smaller diameter. The GC Method Translator tool allows you to see how your method can be improved before you even install a column or order parts. This way you can be sure you're using the right parts for the right job and you can completely optimize your GC analysis. Just a quick comment. To keep relative retention times constant, be sure that the new column you want to try has a similar phase ratio as the column you want to replace. This is just the ratio between ID and film thickness. This is a value that also appears on the calculator, so just be sure that it's constant on both sides. So it's time to talk about bleed. Let's go first to what bleed is, and then why high efficiency columns are a way to reduce it. So this is how bleed happens. The chemical structure of the stationary phase is in the top left. The terminal end of the stationary phase is a silanol group, highlighted in the red circle. Once this terminal end starts to bend back, it attacks itself in a process called backbeating. Ring structures, which are thermodynamically stable, are liberated and will increase the noise and raise the baseline. The more temperature we provide, the faster we drive this reaction, which is why we see an increase in baseline at higher temperatures. Here is a reason why high efficiency columns are recommended to be used with mass specs. As you increase column length, you increase the amount of stationary phases required to coat it, and thereby increasing the occurrence of this natural reaction. The result is that the longer the column, the greater bleed that it will have. To say it more simple, The more column phase, the greater the natural column bleed. So by decreasing the length of the column, we will also decrease the bleed, which is why efficiency columns are a great choice when working with sensitive detectors such as mass specs. If bleed is an issue in your lab and you are not getting the desired limit of detection for high molecular weight analytes, you have a very good option in our MS grade columns. It's easy to identify these columns because it has the MS name in it. So what does it mean? MS grade columns were initially designed to be used with sensitive detectors like mass specs because, as you may have noticed, with a very high sensitive detector like an MS, you also increase your background noise. When it comes to mass specs, there are a lot of factors that can create background noise in your chromatogram, and one of these factors is column bleed. So our R&D scientists designed these columns specifically for use with mass specs that have 50% less column bleed than traditional polysiloxane columns. These columns can be used with other detectors besides mass specs, as well as where low noise and high sensitivity are needed. Now, it's a good time to discuss what is not bleed. There are a lot of misconceptions about what is and what is not column bleed. Too often, when people are using a mass spec and they see peaks in their chromatogram that aren't supposed to be there, they do NIST research on the peak. And if the search indicates some sort of siloxane-based peak, people just concluded that it must be column bleed and wrongfully blame the column. It is important to note that columns can never create peaks. Peaks must come from somewhere else in the flow path of the GC. A likely culprit creating these ghost peaks may be coming from your septum, not your column. So before jumping to conclusions and saying that the column has gone bad because you have ghost peak in your chromatogram, maybe take a look at your septa. They are easy to change, inexpensive, and will most likely solve your problem. In my own experience, I've tracked these ghost peaks all the way to the vial cap inserts. So having good quality vials, caps, and GC consumables overall is another way to maximize productivity in your lab. I've literally spent hours trying to identify where my ghost peaks were coming from, and in a high throughput lab, this downtime time can be costly. Well, back to GC column. If this isn't column bleed, then what bleed looks like? This is what column bleed actually looks like. Column bleed will look like a rise in the baseline at high temperatures, but will stay at a steady signal as long as the temperature remains constant. It is natural for the baseline to increase slightly as the temperature is increased. What is important to note is that we don't see any peaks, just an increased baseline. Here we can see the advantage of an MS column versus a standard one. In this chromatogram there are 3 temperature hold regions. Notice how the standard column doesn't stabilize as nicely at the max temp and has a bleed of 13.3 picoamps as compared to the MS column that has a bleed of 2.3 picoamps at the same temperature. This decrease in bleed allows you to have greater sensitivity at higher temperatures because you aren't having to fight as much background noise due to column bleed. Now, we're ready to move to the last consideration when picking the right GC column, inertness. In addition to new column chemistries, inertness is one of those areas in which Agilent has pushed the envelope in recent years. Agilent ultra-inert technology, developed by our R&D teams, offer a proven advantage in inertness performance over competitor columns for demanding compounds. The example shows DB624 Ultra Inert against competitor columns as an example of superior peak shape for pyridine. If you combine best-in-class inertness with low bleed column technology, you get the utmost sensitivity for analysis, making these Ultra Inert GC columns the ultimate partner of your GC-MS system. Our Ultra Inert GC columns is just a part of Agilent's inert flow path solution focus. We know trace analysis requires attention to the smallest detail, and as detection limits push lower and lower, a series of GC columns and consumables, including liners, gold seals, and ferrules, are available for applications that request the most sensitivity out of your GC-MS system. Well, going back to Ultra Inert GC columns, perhaps a picture is worth 1,000 words. When analyzing samples for pesticides, we encountered some of these active compounds, and it seems like no matter how often we clip the front end of the column, we still ended up with peaked tailings. This is where Ultra Inert columns come in to save the day. Let's take a look at just how much of an improvement an Ultra Inert column can make. Here we see a chromatograph of a pesticide mix injected into the GC. The column is a 5% phenyl phase and is MS gray column. Not a bad separation, but interaction with some compounds and surface activity in the column is pretty clear. If you're wondering what causes this pigtailing, well, it can be many things. Surface activity is just the sum of any possible interaction that can occur between the analyte and the GC column. It could be surface silanols in the stationary phase or even in the fused silica tubing. It can also be metal impurities. Sometimes with these standard columns, you may not see pigtailing during the first runs, but after several of them and several temperature ramps, and maybe not a so clean carrier gas, well, silanols can be created, causing surface activity and subsequent pigtailings. Okay, so this is the same chromatogram on an Agilent DB5MS ultra-inert GC column. As you can notice, no more pigtailing for those active compounds. It's not just a prettier chromatogram, but it significantly improved the limit of detection and sensitivity for those compounds. I know that sensitivity is related mostly to the detector, but you can see here how a wood column contributes to the overall sensitivity of the system by reducing pigtailing of challenging compounds. Here we can see a closer look at Eptachlor. As you can see, the competitor 5MS column has a poor asymmetry and peak fronting for the Eptachlor peak, while we see none with the DB5MS ultra-inert column. By combining our ultra-inert process with mass spec columns, you not only have lower column bleed, but you also have improved chromatography for active challenging compounds. If you have a mass spec, I will encourage you to try our ultra-inert columns. Just because your mass spec is sensitive enough to detect this active compound, it doesn't mean that we have to make our mass spec work so hard to detect them. We can never forget about the separation step, no matter how powerful the mass spec we're using is. So let's give our mass spec a hand by using ultra-inert GC columns and maximize its productivity.
Thanks, Gustavo, about informing us all about increasing efficiency and GC columns. But now we're going to talk about maximizing productivity and decreasing column maintenance with backflush technologies. Here we are showing an example of how backflush can shorten run times for selected analyses. The top chromatogram in dark blue is a run to elute everything that was injected. After the last peak of interest has eluted at about 40 minutes, the column temperature was increased to 320 degrees Celsius for an additional 33 minutes to remove the high boilers. The runtime in this case is about 75 minutes long. With the middle chromatogram in dark red, the user applied backflush after the last peak of interest had eluted, where backflush was then applied for 7 minutes to force the high boilers back through the column and out the split vent. This means that backflush was able to save the user 26 minutes and start the next run earlier than usual, if running the 75-minute long method. Finally, the green trace on the bottom is a blank run after the backflush run has finished to show that all peaks have been successfully backflushed, all those high up boilers are gone, and no carryover was observed. So what does a GC user need to do to run backflush? There are several capillary flow technology, or CFT devices, that can be used for backflush and provide additional flexibility for future applications. These capillary flow devices are connected to a makeup gas, which must be provided by an OxyPC. Each of these devices shown on the slide can be used to do backflushing when used in combination with an inlet with this capability, such as a splitless inlet. You can also use any of the splitters with a makeup gas to quick swap your column, meaning that you can change the column without venting your mass spec. One of the most popular CFT devices is the Purge Ultimate Union. This union is commonly used for mid-column backflush for pesticide residue analysis in food on GC MS systems. The Purge Ultimate Union can be used to help facilitate backflush mode with a mid-column setup, as stated on the previous slide, or it can also be used in a guard column setup with a shorter column from the inlet to the union and the main analytical column connecting the union to the mass spec. If you have a mass spec detector, you're probably well aware of how long executing event cycle is. Since your mass spec ion source is heated, it requires carrier gas flow to prevent oxidation and damage to the source components that are under vacuum, if you wish to make any changes on the GC side while the system's still under vacuum. It is important then, if we want to avoid breaking vacuum, to have an alternative carrier gas supply to feed the mass spec while we're doing maintenance. This is where the purged ultimate union comes in, since it's connected to an aux EPC supplying additional makeup gas flow. You don't have to cool down and vent the mass spec to do inlet or the first column or guard column maintenance, whether it's replacing a gold sealant liner or trimming the head of your first column. This saves a huge amount of time, not waiting for your system to have to reach vacuum once you've vented and pumped it back down, re-equilibrate before you can run, and you won't have to feel as rushed to get the system under vacuum again because you already had the PUU and could do this while the system was still under vacuum on the mass spec side. Using CFT devices like the PUU can save time on a run-to-run basis with backflush and the additional benefit of event-free inlet and first column maintenance. So how does backflush work in the GC system? This image is a rendering of the purged ultimate union in action. Here's our guard column from the inlet to the union as represented by the blue dashed line. The connection at the purged ultimate union is made using flexible metal ferrules and CFT column nuts. You can see the carrier gas supply line, the metal tubing from the EPC to the union, shown here by the green dashed arrow. Finally, the flow exits the purged ultimate union and travels through the analytical column for separation prior to entry into the mass spec. After your last target analyte has eluted, it's time to run backflush mode, which is configured into our GCMS method. The EPC pressure will increase the flow at the purged ultimate union to hold normal flow going through column 2 towards the mass spec, which is not shown. And it also provides a higher reversed flow, shown by the blue line and arrow pointing towards the inlet, back out through the split vent valve. This is backflush. Instead of pushing those heavy matrix compounds further onto your column, the midpoint pressure pushes those columns back out of the column and inlet. Now we can do even more to keep our productivity high and downtime low by keeping the MS source clean with JetClean. We've talked about using fritted liners in backflush to better work with dirty samples, but we also need to think about the mass spec and ways to keep it clean. For some applications, increasing the temperature of your source can add some benefit, but another option is using JetClean. It's not a new type of source, but a way to keep your source cleaner and longer before having to do manual cleaning. JetClean introduces a low flow of hydrogen directly into the source, either during or after the analysis, to keep the source clean from run to run. Here's an example of how it works. We're going to use a red Sharpie to simulate the buildup on one of the lenses in our source, as shown on the right side of the slide. On the bottom left lens, you can see what is accomplished by baking out the source, and while the red lines are a bit fainter, not much difference has been made, and you still should probably manually clean this lens. On the right, you can see the improvement that just one JetClean cycle can make. Most of the heavy contamination has been removed where it was exposed to hydrogen, and the remaining dark inked areas are consistent with being masked by the lens stack design. There are two ways to incorporate JetClean into an analysis, and they're offline cleaning or clean-only mode and acquiring clean mode. In offline cleaning, the hydrogen will be introduced into the source after the samples have been processed by setting up and running the offline clean method in a sequence. This cleaning method is good for general applications and any target analytes that might have undesired interactions with hydrogen. Also, offline cleaning mode does not require modification of a current method or tune file. It's just adding additional run at the end of the sequence. In acquire and clean mode, a small amount of hydrogen is introduced during ionization and during the actual run to help continuously reduce contaminants. Since there's a small amount of hydrogen going into the source, this mode is suggested for more stable compounds and analyses, like polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, that don't tend to react with hydrogen. Because of the potential for interactions, clean and acquire mode is only recommended for use with electron impact ionization modes, your EI mode. If you need to analyze polar compounds that might contain nitrogen, oxygen, or sulfur that could react with hydrogen, then the clean-only mode would be the best. How much could JetClean help to maintain an instrument's uptime and productivity? Let's look at an example case where a dirty sample, and in this case it's apple, is prepared using the Ketchers extraction technique. Ketchers is a great sample prep technique to clean up samples, but even with this sample prep, the GC-MSMS system still requires some manual source cleaning, and in this case it was once a month as shown on the left side of the screen. The time to vent the system, clean the source, and have the GC-MSMS ready to run can cost a whole day of lost sample analysis time. Comparatively, those same samples prepared and run on a mass spec using JetClean in the clean-only mode was able to run from August 18th to January 14th, a jump from manually cleaning every month to only once every 6 months, which we show on the right. That's an 80% reduction in the need for manual cleaning. Now, if you don't currently have a JetClean and are thinking it might be a good feature to add to an existing GC mass spec system, upgrade kits do exist for single and triple quad systems. So we've talked about maximizing throughput and productivity, but if we don't avoid leaks at connection points, the time efficiency gained with those new columns, backflush, and jet cleaning your source will be destroyed. So let's avoid leaks with our self-tightening nuts. The new self-tightening nuts are able to be installed by hand, no tools needed. The design still has a spring-driven piston that continually presses against the graphite Vespel ferrule so that thermal cycles will not cause any leaks. It's able to flex and avoid leaking, as can be observed on the chromatogram shown on the right. Standard nuts could have leaks after just one thermal cycle, and continued use of a leaking nut can cause significant baseline issues and irreversible damage to the column after just 25 runs. Comparatively, the self-tightening nut stays tight and has no air leaks even after 400 injections. Also, a collar has been added to the base of the self-tightening nut. This collar has a rubber grip in it to help hold the column in place when you're installing the column and nut into either the inlet or detector or mass spec transfer line. You don't have to use an extra septum or whiteout to mark the location of the column at the base of the nut for the proper height of the column into an inlet anymore. For the inlet, just set the column distance above the ferrule to the proper height. For example, 5 millimeters above the ferrule on a split-splitless inlet. Hand tighten the collar to make sure that it doesn't move, and then install the column and nut into the inlet until the whole nut is finger tight. Then you just remove the collar and you're ready to go. So in this slide, I'm going to show you how to quickly and easily install the MSD self-tightening nut with the new collar in your column. So we put our graphite Vespel ferrule onto the column and we make sure that the flat end is facing the mass spec. Then we use our column installation tool, which is basically a transfer line without all the extra metal. Slide the column up. Of course, we want to trim the column, as all good chemists will remember to do, and then slide it back a little bit. And then I usually install the collar at this point. The collar could be put on earlier in the process. It's not a big deal. And it has that little slot to make it easier. Now I pull the column to 1 millimeter past the end of the transfer line. And here I'm being a little bit picky on that. So just checking that it's really 1 millimeter past, we tighten that collar to make sure the column isn't going to move when we're trying to install it into the mass spec transfer line. And you'll see that it hasn't moved at all even though we've been tugging on it, or I've been tugging on it. So you can remove that column installation tool. It helps set the distance. and then we're going to slide it straight into the transfer line. Be sure to support the column as you slide it into the transfer line, and then we're going to hand tighten the nut in. And remove the collar. What you'll notice is that we didn't have to open the side door of the mass spec. We didn't have to take off the ceramic tip and the nut on the transfer line to check that 1 millimeter distance. We're able to just vent the system, open the vent valve, and install the new column without having to open the door and risk additional leaks.
All right. Thank you, Angie, again for that explanation. We are in the last topic of the presentation, and honestly, we couldn't give a webinar about maximizing the productivity of your GC MES without talking about our latest GC systems. I'm talking about Intuvo and the new 8890 and 8860 GCs. Intelligent GCs are the ultimate tool for maximizing your lab productivity. Well, we all have read about smart devices in recent years. It all probably began with smartphones, I guess, but what are we really referring to when talking about smart instruments? So before we start, we should define what a smart GC is and what it matters. Smart and connected instruments are more self-aware, being able to self-diagnose and think like an expert. That enables them to help preempt maintenance and automate troubleshooting. The smart GCs are comprised of an ecosystem including embedded sensors, powerful processors, and smart algorithms, all served up by easily accessible interfaces. All these taken together allow smart GCs to enable remote troubleshooting and monitoring, optimize lab operations, and drive lab operating efficiency, which in turn reduce unplanned downtime and increase productivity. So, in the last few minutes left on the presentation, let's discuss some of these features in more detail. Agilent self-aware features, which has been in continuous development since the 5890 and 6890 days, come into prominence in these instruments. These include a wide variety of diagnostic tests and maintenance items that enable the GC to know more about itself than ever before. Another feature is extensive onboard help and information that give you everything that you need right at your fingers to be successful with your GC. Finally, to top it off, the browser interface allows you to access key features of your smart GC from virtually anywhere. Like with my colleagues in this picture, one of my favorite slides for sure. But back to the browser interface. It is really a convenient way to access your smart GC and stay productive. Here, you can see it on the bench, right next to the instrument as the planar column is being changed on an Intuvo. It's nice to have the browser interface open with the column change video playing as you follow along. It is also nice to check how your GC is doing while on a meeting. Perhaps not the most ideal situation, but just a quick glimpse to ensure that important runs are going smoothly. And of course, checking it from home. You always get calls at the least convenient times. Here, a user is on the phone going over system logs, while a colleague are waiting for the cookies to finish. Now, we don't necessarily know how and where users will use the browser interface, but these examples show that you're only limited by what your network allows. You could conveniently access the browser interface from distant work sites when sharing information, and we have a number of users with responsibility of accessing remote sites. In addition to all these intelligent features of the new Agilent GCs, we also launched a series of smart consumables that interface with your intelligent GC and extends its capabilities. The first one we will talk about is the gas clean sensors for the 8890 and the 8860 GCs. These new gas filters has a sensor that optically monitors the color changes as your gas filter is used and notifies you via the touchscreen and browser when it's time to replace your filter. Visual inspections, which are prone to errors, can contribute to costly downtimes, and these are now a thing of the past. The second one that I want to talk about is the GC column with Smart Key technology. For those of you familiar with Intuvo, you have already seen the unique advantage of the Smart Keys. What I can tell you is that the Smart Keys contains and stores important information about the GC column and its usage. These include column configuration, part and serial number, and also number of injections and date of when the column was installed, and even time at or above the temperature limits. This type of information from the column offers you two advantages. First, it reduces possible errors of manual input of method parameters. Second, it helps you schedule maintenance with usage tracking. This translates into benefits such as better data quality and the ability to better plan for preventive maintenance before issues occur. So, with that, I hope that we gave you a few ideas in how to maximize productivity with your GCMS systems. As you have seen, every aspect matters, from consumables to GC techniques, all the way to the GC system itself. Agilent continuous innovation in GC columns and supplies will help you optimize your analytical flow path with best-in-class inertness and extended consumables lifetime, which easily translate into better sensitivity and less downtime of your system. Hard to ignore the benefits of methods such as backflash. Thanks, Angie, for the great explanation on this technique. Backflashing, as we saw, is a powerful tool that allows us to eliminate contamination without baking your column and even baking your mass spec. Finally, smart systems and consumables are here to stay and are among the best and most unique tools that you can use to optimize your lab productivity today and in the future. Many thanks for your attention, and we are very happy to answer now your questions.
Well, thank you, Gustavo and Angie, for those excellent presentations. As Gustavo mentioned, we now can move on to the question and answer section of this webinar. So, Angie and Gustavo, I think the first question we have for you today is, can you provide some example analyses for which you might use online cleaning with JetClean?
Thanks, David. This is Angie, and I can take that one. So examples for online cleaning with JetClean, that means that you're running your sample through at the same time you're introducing hydrogen. A good one is using polyaromatic hydrocarbons. They're fairly inert compounds, but they also like to stick, especially in the source. So online cleaning is an awesome one to use with PAHs. And generally, a lot of the other hydrocarbon analyses that are required to use GCMS can also have online cleaning used with them in case of maybe online the bunker fuel application on ASTM, or if you're worried about your gasoline analyzer ASTM method. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. We have another question here, which is, what applications could use or benefit from backflush?
And I'll take that one again. I think we mentioned that pesticides and food analysis is a example application that can benefit from backflush. Obviously, pesticides in cannabis, if you're using that, or any type of heavy, dirty matrix, it's possible you could also move it onto the environmental field, again, with heavy, dirty matrices. And if we touch into the HPI realm, you could also use it on that bunker fuel application to try to keep your column clean so you don't have to replace it quite as often.
Okay, thank you, Angie. We have another question here, which is, what is the benefit of using an MS ultra inert column such as DB5MS ultra inert over a DB5MS?
All right. I think it's columns time again. I think it's a good question. The ultra inert is a proprietary activation that we developed at Agilent that allows you to improve your sensitivity, your peak symmetry. And by improving your peak symmetry, less peak tailing, better peak shapes, which allows you to look at a small peak that are like trace level, really just a little bit above the baseline. So if you're doing trace analysis, this is where you're going to see a huge benefit in switching to ultra-inert technology, especially with active compounds like or polar compounds like you can find in pesticide samples or pH analysis, and even some alcohols and aldehydes. So when you're struggling with this, you are going to see the benefits of ultra-inert technology.
Thank you, Gustavo. Our next question is there an Agilent capillary column suitable for separation of low molecular, say C3 to C8 VOCs in a very humid matrix?
Yes, it's another good and challenging question. These are very difficult to separate. There are two alternatives. I'm going to talk about the most common, and you can use a silica plot column. In our catalog, we have one called CP silica plot. There are many column dimensions. This allows you, these plot columns give you very good selectivity for isomers in the C1 to C5 range in the presence of water, without the influence of the water on the retention time. So if you're struggling with water, this is a better solution than other ones like a Q-plot. So this will be my first choice. The second one is you can try a standard capillary wall-coated fuchs silica like the 5 or 6-4. I will go with the 6-4 to increase a little bit the polarity. I will also go with a thicker film to trap this better. So if you're using 0.25, film thickness, that may not be enough. You may want to go 1.8, for example. That will allow you to retain this better if there are coelutions with isoprene or the dienes. And the other one is that you have to try to go as low as possible on your initial temperature. If you use 40 is standard, but if you can go to 30, and we have actually a partner, it's called Sims Technology. It's a channel partner of Agilent, and they have something that I really like. It's called the Ice Door. So if you Google it, it's called Ice Door GC. It's a system that allows you to cool down your oven up to 0 Celsius. So if you can go to 0 Celsius, you will have no problem in separating this with a 5-phase, for example. So I think I give you a few options, but it's certainly doable. And it can be challenged at first, but with the right column, it's easier to do.
Thanks, Gustavo. And a follow-up, I'm not sure whether you answered this question, but is the 624 ultra-inert column resistant to water in sample matrix?
Yes. Again, there is an evolution in column technology, and ultra-inert is the latest in innovations in column technology, and allows you to do better with water matrices. So the WAX UI, the 624 UI, they focus very well the water peak and allows you to eliminate any drift on your baselines. We still prefer Q-plot for an analysis of water, but if you have water as the matrix, as the solvent, these columns have no problem and they will not degrade. Back in the day, there were issues with water samples, but when using this current technology, no problems anymore.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. We have quite a long question here, so bear with me a little bit. The question is, I would like to know how I can calculate pressure flow for a GC system when using a back flush union. I'm not sure about how to use the Agilent pressure flow calculator to calculate the pressure for the column installed before the back flush union and the back flush pressure. I currently use a 5-meter pre-column connected to a 15-meter column connected to a back flush union and another 15-meter column with one end connected to the back flush union and the other end connected to the mass spec.
Hi, David. I'll take that one. So I'm assuming that the 5-meter pre-column is either connected via a press fit connection or an ultimate union to that 15-meter column. So let's just call that 20 meters of column in the front and then 15 meters after the back flush union. If you have a 7890 or 8890, the more modern versions of Agilent's GCs, you can actually put in your column information into the method editor and then just apply your ideal constant flow, because hopefully you're using constant flow that you want for the first column, and then that will auto-calculate the pressure. And then there's a really nice feature that when you've got the extra aux EPC and you've told it that you've connected with the method editor, you've connected the first column through to an aux EPC or channel, and then you connect the second column to the mass spec, you automatically get the ability to use a backflush tab that's on the method editor side. And in there, you input your details on how long you want the backflush program to run, and ideally, put in the time you want it to run, and the system will calculate the pressure required at the backflush union to actually do the flush out through the inlet at the end of your run. Now, if you're asking the pressure while you're doing a run, that's where we suggest using constant flow. Set your first column to, let's say, 1 or 1.2 mils per minute. Set the second column to 0.2 mils per minute higher at least. So if your first column is 1.2, the second column should be 1.4, and it should auto-calculate the pressures for you. If you have an older model, like a 6890, then it's very complicated to discuss it over a webinar like this. So what I'll do is contact you offline to get some more information and help you through it, because that takes a little more work with a 6890.
That's great. Thank you very much, Angie. And just another question on backflush, probably for you as well, I guess, is can the backflush system be mounted only on Agilent equipment?
Our favorite answer is always it depends. So it depends on the part of the system. Agilent uses very specific electronic pressure control modules that are different from other companies' equipment. So if you wanted to buy a full system from Agilent, the backflush system with the capillary flow technology, the purged ultimate union, then you would need it to be on an Agilent unit. However, that capillary flow technology pieces, the splitters, the purged ultimate union, could be connected to a different pressure control module if someone wanted to do that. So it's a yes and no answer, to be very confusing.
Thank you, Angie. We have another very long question which has multiple parts in it, so again, just bear with me. The question is that the person's been having doubts about the quantity of sample that can be injected, and he wants to know how to calculate the maximum and minimum sample that can be injected according to the column capacity, and what is an acceptable MS signal range, and how can he determine the highest and lowest acceptable signal? Is there a Beer-Lambert law for spectrophotometers?
Yes, I think Angie and we can both share our feedback here. It really depends. This is a question it really depends on your system. If the sensitivity or the sample capacity or how much you can inject is not dependent on your detector or on your column or your liner. It depends on the capacity of your system and how optimized you have it for your application. The rule of thumb will be is always dependent, for example, on the limit of detection. And again, the GC column doesn't have a limit of detection, right? But the column can help with the sensitivity. If you have a very low bleed and very good inertness, you will get even more sensitivity, and it will help your detector to actually see something that in an older column you may not be able to see it. So it depends. I will say there is not a rule of thumb like the Beer-Lambert law, but certainly taking care of your noise level, your signal to noise ratio, your LOD. Sometimes it's 3 times the noise level if a good measurement of limit of detection. So things like that. But and also on the upper side is the same. It depends really on once your symmetry values, once you start to saturate your column, for example. It doesn't mean, okay, that's it, I cannot do it anymore. That means maybe you have to change your split ratio to reduce the saturation levels. So it's actually a question, an answer about how your system responds and how it can be optimized to improve your sensitivity levels or your capacity on the top end of the analysis. Angie, you want to make any comments? Yes.
Sure, thanks, Gustavo. And that was a great outline on a lot of the answers. And like you said, it's really dependent also on the application you're doing. So an acceptable mass spec signal range, it depends. Ideally, it's somewhere between 10 to the 3 counts, and I mean the highest level is 10 to the 7, and you don't want to hit that very often because that's where you're going to start to get fronting peaks, and let's hope we don't get the shark fin peaks, but as you're getting up into the 10.7 range, that's where you can find those. Usually, if you're doing a GCMS analysis, we suggest that you inject, at least to start, a microliter. And then your concentration also has a factor. So a lower concentration is going to give you a lower signal. And ideally, just let's say for GC single quad, I mean, I'd say use a detection range between 100 part per billion and 10s to 100 part per million is approximately the range. Now, depending again on the application, sometimes you can go lower, but I mean that's the pain of it. To determine the highest acceptable signal, we actually have a document that's focused on working on tuning that actually can help answer that, and that's something that we can send over to you. But the best is to start at about a 1 microliter injection, and then that's usually where a lot of customers sit with it, and then they'll tune if they need to do a splitless injection because they're doing trace analysis. You'll do a splitless injection, and it's heavily application dependent.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Angie and Gustavo, for yet another comprehensive answer. We have another question here, which is, we currently use 15 millimeter times 250 micrometers times 0.25 micron columns. What 0.18 millimeter column would you recommend to use to maintain analysis time?
Yes, I two quick answers here. The first one is that is to use the Agilent calculator. It will be able to transfer your existing methods to the newest one, to the one you want to try. So you don't have to buy anything. You just have to use a calculator to determine how it's going to look if you change something. You can change the carrier gas, you can change the column dimensions like length, film thickness, or internal diameter. So I will recommend you to find look at the calculator. If you didn't have the chance to look at the link, we can send it to you. And the second one is that for me the most important consideration is the beta value. The beta value is the ratio between the film thickness and the ID. And so it's very important to keep it constant so that you don't start to have some selectivity or retention time issues. So for this case, a 0.25, 0.25. For the 0.18, it will be 0.18 micrometer film thickness, so that you can have a phase ratio of 250. But again, the calculator, I just did it right now, and it's easy to use, and it will give you the answer you're looking for.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gustavo. Our next question is, can we use backflush with diffusion pumps?
So I need to double check with some of my colleagues, but I believe you can at least use it if you're going to do a mid-column backflush. Possibly not for a post-column backflush, but that's where I need to double check on it. But if you're doing it on the closer to the inlet, so if you have, let's say, a 5 meter and then a 15 meter column, and you've got the backflush at the end of the 5 meter, that's almost like a pre-column style backflush. Or if you've got the mid-column, it should be okay because it's been designed with the software to always push the same flow rate to the mass spec. So if you set it to 1.4, it'll always push 1.4, even when you're doing the backflush where you've increased the pressure at that midpoint or pre-column point. But with a post-column, that's where it's just a short distance into the mass spec, and so actually that would raise the pressure and flow rate into the mass spec. So we encourage not to use post-column backflush for really any mass spec analysis. FID and other detectors generally are okay with it, but on mass spec, mid-column, pre-column backflush, and I'll double check on the diffusion pump.
We have another question, which is, can you discuss the use of hydrogen as a carrier gas?
Yes, this is a tricky question. I will explain why. Overall, hydrogen as carrier gas is very, very useful if you want to speed up your analysis. I didn't go into too much detail on when I was talking about the Golay plot on what the differences are when you switch carrier gases like helium, nitrogen, or hydrogen, but there are differences, and you can go faster with hydrogen. However, the use of hydrogen as a carrier gas for GCMS is not really recommended. It's better to go with helium. For example, too high of a flow rate on hydrogen as carrier gas can overload the vacuum system if the pump being used is not capable of removing the excess gas. Another possibility is, for example, the occurrence of source and inlet surface chemical reactions with certain chemical compounds. So these are sometimes referred to as ion molecule reactions that can take place in a high pressure in the ion source because of the decreased pumping speed for hydrogen relative to helium. There are a couple more because of the viscosity and because of the nature of the flow that goes to the MS that really doesn't go with hydrogen as a carrier gas. So for non-GCMS, and I know this webinar is about GCMS, that's why I want to make this argument. For non-GCMS applications, hydrogen is the future. There are several options for generators, but for GCMS, I will be very, very careful. I know there are a few applications where you can use it, but for most of them, we'd rather avoid it for now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gustavo. Our next question is, can you repeat the section about having the same phase ratio for the translator?
Yes. Phase ratio is the relationship between column inner diameter and the stationary phase film thickness. If, for example, a good separation has been achieved on a larger diameter column and a faster analysis is desired, this can often be accomplished by reducing the inner diameter of the column without sacrificing or even in some cases improving the separation efficiency. I think that was clear on the presentation. However, to maintain a similar compound elution pattern when narrowing the column ID, the film thickness must also be changed. By choosing a column with a similar phase ratio, it will be easier to translate your application to the new column without suffering from some retention times or selectivity issues. This is very, very important, and the calculator gives you this value. If you are working with a 0.25, 0.25, that's like a 250 beta value or phase ratio. If you want to move to 0.18, that means you don't have to use 0.25 micrometer film thickness. That will be a different phase ratio. In this case, will be 0.18 as well. So again, very important to consider when you want to speed your analysis, but keep the same retention time pattern and selectivity pattern in the new analysis.
Thank you very much. We have another question here, which is, what's the difference between backflush and putting the MS in off mode?
I can take that one, David. The main differences are that backflush occurs at the end of the method that's been running. So at the end of the oven temperature program, it's built into the method to then start a backflush program if you have the Purge Ultimate Union and have set up your method to do so. Your MS is obviously going to not be collecting data anymore because you've finished your oven temperature program, but what happens is you hold that higher temperature in the oven for a little bit longer of time period, about 3 to 5 minutes, depending on column lengths. It could be a little bit longer, but then you increase the the pressure at the midpoint on that PUU, and it pushes the gas back out the inlet while maintaining the same amount of flow at the mass spec. Now, if you just turn off the mass spec, that allows, and not use backflush, let's rephrase that. So if you just turn the mass spec off, so let's say you turn off the filaments, you're not collecting the data, but you still have your oven temperature high, like you're going to bake out your oven and bake the extra peaks out, that means you're still putting all of that, junk or dirt or extraneous matrix onto your column, and then furthermore onto your source. You may have to replace your column more often and clean your source more often. Benefit of backflush is it happens at the end of your method, built into your method, pushes anything that is not as volatile, so that heavy matrix gunk that may have gotten to the head of your column, pushes it back out through the split vent trap without getting anything to the source at all.
That's great. Thank you very much, Angie. Now we have one attendee who's submitted quite a few questions here, so maybe we could take one at a time with some shortish answers. And the first question is, the Purged Ultimate Union, does it need additional EPC installation?
So that depends, David. If the user already has a GCMS triple quad, like a 7000 or 7010, the collision cell electronic pressure control module, the EPC, has an extra channel for backflush. So if you have that, then no. If you don't have an additional EPC already or a collision cell EPC because you're running a triple quad, then yes, you would need an additional EPC.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, backflush is increasing split vent cartridge trap change, correct?
It can. It really depends on how dirty your matrices are. So we've seen with analyses like tobacco analysis, then it's recommended even without backflush to increase your cartridge trap change. It doesn't increase it significantly. Actually, I ran my triple quad for 6 months straight, and at the end of it, I think we swapped out the split vent trap before moving on to a different analysis. So it's not like we have to replace it every week, but it can increase that change time period.
Thank you. The next question is, can we install JetClean with our actual common MS source?
So JetClean will be part it's actually very similar to the chemical ionization module, not in terms of the source, but in the fact that you have a flow control module that gets put onto the top of the analyzer box, and then what's changed out is actually the transfer line, because you need to have the line feed in for the hydrogen. So you can still use your same mass spec source if it's an extractor source or an inert source. That stays the same. What changes is that transfer line bolts on, and then you also get an additional flow module.
Okay, thank you very much, Angie. The next question is, my analyses are highly variable at fire debris, so backflushing is attractive. However, interpeak ratios are highly important. are the differing abundances of the central peaks for the backflushed chromatogram relative to the bakeout chromatogram a consequence of the backflush?
So I can't say that I've heard of this occurring before. Your peak ratio abundances shouldn't, well, if it's, we'll have to think about that one. In the bake out of a column, this is where Gustavo might yell at me about talking about stationary standards, so I'll let him jump in. But it shouldn't, I wouldn't think that baking out the column, unless you're going close to the edge of the maximum temp allowed, shouldn't change your inter-peak ratios. And it definitely shouldn't change any of the ratios of the fragments on the mass spec side. Gustavo, have you heard anything about that?
This is no. I agree. I don't think this should change the inter-peak ratios. No, definitely a question that we should take for the team to discuss. So if you don't mind, we will follow up with you, and I appreciate this is a very good question.
Great, thank you very much, Angie and Gustavo. And I think the final question, actually, no, another one just appeared. So the penultimate question tonight is: you mentioned retrofitting quadrupole systems with JetClean. Are there other MS detectors that are able to be retrofitted with a similar system?
So right now, JetClean can only be retrofitted on our single quad and triple quad mass spec systems. So whether it's the any of the 5977s or the 7000s or 7010 or so that covers most of them. Your inert plus, your extractors, your high efficiency sources. Those will all be covered. It cannot be used on the QTOF based on the design of the QTOF and the fact that you don't want to send hydrogen up your time of flight tube. That could not go well. So please, you cannot use JetClean on the QTOF, but just the gas chromatograph single and triple quads.
That's great. Thank you very much, Angie. And I think the final question is: why not use concurrent backflushing to save even more time? So once your last analyte of interest has passed the PUU, turn on the backflush so that you backflush during your method.
And that is a legitimate idea. There are some analyses where my colleagues do that. It's usually not on the mass spec side, because then you'll be shoving more of your analytes and increasing the flow to the mass spec, and you need to make sure that everyone's still well separated. If you increase that flow, you also don't want to increase the flow too much. It is possible. We tend not to use it too much, at least in my personal experience, but I have had other colleagues who use it more on FID, and some of the other non-mass spec detectors will do concurrent backflushing. So legitimate, yes, you can do it, and you could save even more time there.
Okay, well, once again, Angie and Gustavo, thank you very much for your presentations today. I'd also like to thank our scientific partners in this event, being Agilent, for all their technical input and support. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for logging in and listening. Thank you, and goodbye.